Welcome to part 3 on the mental health awareness discussion and medication of children discussion we've been having with Jared McLain, Anthony Miglorino, and myself, Zachary Small. That's right. This is part 3 of the Oak and Rock Fatherhood series we've been running, focused on the mental health and medication of children in modern days and as we head forward. There's a lot going on in the world. We've had some great discussions on this, and today we're diving a little bit deeper. We're going to talk about identity. We're going to talk about resolutions. We're going to discuss terms and what they mean to make sure that we are all on the same playing field, understanding what it is we're talking about. Most importantly, we're going to break down how you can help yourself, how you can recognize the situation you're in, not as one that's hopeless or one that, why me? The shackles, these weights, sometimes it feels like too much. We're here to take some of that weight off. We might be 3 absolute strangers that you just crossed on the internet, but I tell you right now, we care. We want you to win. We want to help. We want your family to improve. And so this discussion, this closure, and it's not really a closure. We'll probably have Jared back on to talk again. But the closure of at least this 3-part series, is going to be aimed with offering you tools to bring forward and some information and advice that you can take with you into the day-to-day so you can start seeing this yourself. And you can recognize the difference between those who want to help you and those who may want to just push their message to support what it is they've already believed. But with that, gentlemen, welcome back to part 3 of medicating your children and what has evolved to the mental health of families.
Well, they're inseparable. If you're talking about a child that needs to be medicated, there's probably a reason why people have chosen to go that path. And if there is a problem, then it's the problem of the family. It's not a problem of the kid. The kid's going to have difficulties with it, but everyone else is going to be in the same boat with you. And so you have to approach it as a family. There is no way to separate those two out. So yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things that stood out to me in our discussions, you were bringing it up earlier, statistics versus anecdotes, the truth versus your truth. And something that I personally would like to dive into is, I have this, meaning I am this. I am anxious. I am depressed. I am XYZ. And I don't like how we put our identity onto the thing as opposed to I am a man with this or I am a woman dealing with this. And so I think that differentiation is going to be necessary as well. And we're going to get into all of that. But Jared, you had mentioned before we hit record, you're in your dissertation. You are deep in the weeds, man. I see like the schoolwork you're doing. I'm really glad I'm not a part of that life at all anymore. So you got it, good sir. Keep running with it. Don't fumble the football. But you've been learning quite a bit along the way as to what terms mean. When we're talking about something, we mean something else, but the terms we're using are incorrect. And so could you break down a few instances you've seen, and even in our discussions these past 2 series?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that people need to understand about psychology and science in general is that when we're talking about something like medicating a child, then we say something like, well, this medicine that we're using is 60% effective at treating this disorder or something like that. That's data. That's looking at a large number of things and saying, here's what we find on this scale. And you can think of it in terms of like, and it's different than data. Data is different than anecdotes. And you can look at it in terms of, say, average height. You can look at the United States and say, well, what's the average height of a man in the United States? And I think right now it's something like 5'9" or 5'10". Well, I happen to be 6'4". I don't fit the average. So my anecdote, and somebody says, well, okay, what's the average height? It's 5'10". Well, that's not right. I'm 6'4", so that can't be true. Well, that's garbage. That's one person and their experience versus the experience of 280, 300 million people. So when we're looking at statistics, we're looking at vast numbers of people. So your individual experience, your individual lived experience, or the experience of the people that you know or the people that you've seen, that is what that there's 2 very different things. I can't take my height and say 6'4". Well, everything in the United States should be built to handle people that are 6'4". Every car, every bed, every pair of
discrimination.
Clothes.
I wouldn't be able to reach the gas pedal, man.
It's dumb. It doesn't even work. But then you talk about things like mental health, and you say, well, if you have this condition, then there's this likelihood that you're going to have this and that. And somebody else is like, dude, that doesn't work. That's not the way I see it. And yeah, okay, that's great. And for you, that is 100% true. but it's not true for everybody. Nor did I say that what's true on average is true for you. There's a big difference between those things. And then there's the other problem, which is that we say something like, this medicine is effective 60% of the time. Okay, that's great. But still, now we're into the realm of probability. So when I say it's 60% effective, does that mean it's going to be effective for you 60% of the time? No. That means you have about a 2 in 3 chance that it's going to be effective for you. And you have a 1 in 3 chance that it's not going to work at all. And maybe it won't work at the same level as other people. So when we're talking about these numbers of large studies, we're not talking about you. We're talking about the study. And when we're talking about you, we're also talking about the probabilities. When you look at that study, it might apply to you, it might not. And so don't sit there and think, oh, this can't be true. This it doesn't work because that's not my experience. Guess what? Somebody else did have that experience. A bunch of people had that experience, and they are also right. So those numbers need to be taken with a bit of a grain of salt when it comes to the individual, but also you can't ignore them when it comes to the population. There are things that are very effective for a large number of people. Just because it didn't work or because it did work for you doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody or that it's not going to work for you. So you have to make that balance of understanding that there's probability and that there's statistics, and then there's you or your neighbor.
Feelings is what you're talking about.
Well, even just lived experiences, things like my mom is a great example of this, because when you talk about genetics and you talk about heritability, there's an even chance that your heritability comes from your mom or your dad, because it's 50-50. When their genetics combine, that's what you get. And my mom's like, I don't believe that.
I like her. Nope.
I'm like, well, why? Well, we had this neighbor in California, and all their kids looked exactly like the dad. So the male has the more genetic, strength. I'm like, that's one person, and she bases an entire scientific field that says no, it's 50-50 on this one family, where she says, no, I don't believe that because they all look like the dad. And that's the way a lot of people think. They think, well, that's not true because that was me. Another one, we had a class that I took on sociology and families, where we would talk about things like kids and divorce. And we would say things like, yeah, well, kids that go through divorce statistically are 70% more likely, and I'm just making numbers up here, I don't remember exactly what the word, but like they're 70% more likely to suffer from depression. And then she would raise her hand, that's not true. Why? What do you mean? Well, I'm divorced and I have a son and he's not depressed, so that's not true. That's not a good statistic. So we didn't say your son, we said 70% of them. It really bugs me when people are like, that statistic's not true. That doesn't apply to me. Maybe it doesn't. It doesn't mean it's not true. So anyway, when we're coming to when you're talking about health and mental health and medications and diagnoses and all these numbers, it's not necessarily about feelings. Yes, there is a lived experience that's part of that, but you have to understand that there are things you can do which have a greater chance of success than other things. And just because one thing didn't work doesn't mean that it doesn't work for everybody. So that's the real difficulty you run into when you're dealing with this kind of stuff is how do you separate the statistic from the individual and have the individual understand that there are still statistics that provide greater probabilities for them.
So
good. No, I got a quick one. You said when you said the 50% of marriages end in divorce. Have you heard this?
I have.
Okay, that's the one thrown around. Here's the thing. I've been with Jackie since she was 16 years old. If a dude goes to Vegas and he marries a stripper, meeting her 15 minutes before they got married, and we get divorced, 50% of those marriages ended in divorce.
Yeah.
And so when you see those blanket terms, oftentimes you have to look at the individual that's grabbing the statistic as well. So not only are we looking at the statistic, but what is the person using that for?
Yeah.
The argument for me is like, oh, marriage is such a bad deal. And I'm like, the numbers you're using to justify your argument are somewhat skewed. And so there are even layers inside the layers of what you're saying with the statistics, which is the person who's using them. Why are they using them? In what context or what, angle are they using them to support? And so in this, people watching understand that the delicate subject, we can't dance around everything. We've got to speak like normal men about a normal subject, but you have to be able to take and apply and understand that what we're saying is not square into square. It's like a lava lamp, and we can pick a few things. I can tell you that's lit up. I can tell you it's hot. I can tell you there's a fluid. I can tell you there's a less of a fluid inside floating around, and it's going to go up and it's going to go down. but I can't tell you exactly how that's going to work. And with your children, especially your children, you can't also say, well, you're this because of that. Like, no, you've got to watch them. You've got to see how they're moving, and you've got to base your decisions upon that movement. Anthony, I tried to get that out of my head.
I've been listening to you quite frequently get things out of your head, man. It's been enjoyable. I'm not gonna lie. Straight fire. No, Jared, I know you're using it as an example, but you brought up genes and genetics, and I wanted to get your opinion on this. We're talking about medicating children. I talk a lot about childhood trauma, and do you think that there is a predisposition with genes as like a baseline for people having mental illness in their family? Or this would be my perspective. Like I would say that it's more of a nature versus nurture argument. But I think we now know within psychotherapy, psychology, that trauma creates stress, and stress absolutely can have markers in it that changes DNA, right? It'll make genes switch on or even switch off. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that. What you think about that as far as mental illness showing up in families?
What you're talking about from the genetics expressing themselves based on trauma is what they call epigenetics, which is where the genes that are predisposed to have something either trigger on or off. Now, one thing that is inarguable is that the statistics, going back to statistics, the statistics show that there is a genetic component to mental disorders. We've been able to see it with schizophrenia is very strong. Something like 60% of cases show that there's a genetic component to it. Depression is strong, around 40%. And what we're talking about percentages here, it's shorthand. Somebody's going to jump all over me and say, well, that's not what we're talking about. Yeah, okay, fine. But for shorthand purposes, percentage works. And anxiety and different phobias also seem to have a genetic component. It might surprise people to know that there's other parts that have a genetic component along the same lines. For example, personality. Different aspects of who you are as a person seem to have a genetic component. For example, we can have genetically identical twins that are raised apart, and we look at them later, and about 60-70% of their personality is very similar, and which seems to indicate that there's something there which isn't totally environmental. Now, that being said, there are definitely environmental things that can have a very, very large influence, like trauma, on having mental disorders. So when you talk the nature-nurture argument, different factions are going to say, well, it's more nurture. Others are going to say it's more nature. But nobody in the scientific community says it's absolutely one or the other. They're where that line is.
Well, they don't know
on who you're talking to. We don't know. We can't because it's just too many variables that are involved there. So yeah, there is a genetic component to it. There is a predisposition, if you want to call it that, some pre-wired areas that say you could have this. But what causes it to manifest? That's a better question. And so yeah, no, we don't know where the line is, but there is a component there, certainly.
Yeah. No, that's a good answer. And just to follow up, I would say that what I've read and studied on childhood trauma, me and Zac brought up, I was surprised as hell. He brought up the adverse childhood experience on Dad's Day this morning. And, they do study the effects of trauma, especially on children. This has been something relatively new, but it's getting a lot more attention because they're starting to see how the brain adapts to stress. And I remember one study specifically, they were taking kids who were traumatized and then kids who said they weren't traumatized, right? Which is a whole gray area in itself. But they had them close their eyes and they took brain scans and they checked the brain waves. And the kids who were traumatized, when they closed their eyes, their brains were super active. They couldn't rest. And the kids who weren't traumatized, when they closed their eyes, they were able to be calm, right? They were at peace. So it's just interesting how an effect, right? The adverse childhood experience, it has, I think it's 10 markers. If you've seen domestic violence, if you were physically abused, like harsh physical abuse, sexually abused, there's all these different markers that they show that can alter the brain. And hopefully soon they're actually going to be adding spanking into that ACE test score. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, that's why I was asking, because I think it is interesting to me how we have this mental health problem or this mental illness problem. And a lot of the norm of what society does is to say we have a problem, take the medication to fix it. And now we're starting to see a lot of research into what's causing it, why it might be happening. And I think, to me, that's intriguing, right? And that's the nature versus nurture argument. But more so, and why I bring it up, is it's a parenting problem. That's what I see. The brain development for the first 3 years, we have our kids. If it's getting damaged or we're creating unnecessary stress, and now we're starting to see that stress does create changes in their genes. It creates changes in their personality. It makes them not capable to regulate emotions or even have agency within themselves, right? I think, Zach, when you started this off, you said how parents feel helpless. Adults feel helpless, that they don't know how to help their children, right? They can't solve the problems. I think that is absolutely an effect of childhood trauma. As being an adult, carrying that with your whole life and never healing from it. And now you have kids and you're seeing the effects in your kids and you don't know what to do because you're completely unaware of how it affected you.
You know, that's I think one of the things that drives me in this, you know, and you're right. So what the adverse childhood experience, that's the ACE test.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you guys have read the book Dune, but in it, basically the guy has depressions. All right, so Jared, you'll get this. Anthony, you won't. Doesn't matter.
Like
he
everything.
gets to the planet, I think it's Arrakis. You know, all the spices there. He gets like a big dose of it, and all of a sudden his powers are like unlocked. Like he's like, boom, I can see everything. You, Anthony, were the spice for me. I understood a lot, man. No, I'm fucking dead serious here. I understood a lot.
I don't know how to take that.
It's you really opened my eyes to some shit that I did not know was a thing. And Jared probably has the best understanding because he gets it. So I started the Family Alpha. There was corporal punishment in my home. I lost my mother early. I was around addiction. I performed poorly in school. I checked every box of a failing person. Somebody who was supposed to turn out into the jail cell or hooked on something or sucking dick for cheeseburgers under a bridge. Whoa. You know, and you know, there's a lot of things that could have, I'm sorry, Jared, but a lot of negatives that could send me down. And I look at it, and then I look at myself though. And dude, I look at who I've become, and I'm like, dude, I'm so freaking proud of the work I put in to get to where I am. And this is kind of where it ties into you. The Family Alpha was built with my focus on let's be the best men. Let's be connected with our spouses. Let's be healthy for our children. No hitting, no yelling, let's be good men and strong mentally, physically, spiritually, close to God, close to the world, close to our fellow men, you know, and a good example for others. And I was doing well. And then I come across a dude, Mr. Miglierino, and now I find out there's books about this. There's different methods to take about this. There's freaking tests and there's acronyms. Dude, my world opened up and I thought I was locked in to where now I'm so much further down a path where I thought I was at the apex. I thought I was like crushing it, man. And I was, because from how far, when I'm looking at me, I turned my life around. I didn't turn into, you know, I'm not in jail. I'm not hooked to anything. Like, look at me coming around. And now I'm 100% sober. Now I'm 100% locked in. Finances are great. Physique is great. My relationship with my spouse is better. With my children's better. All of this, I could be the person you were just talking about. I could be the person who's still sitting there like, well, my dad hit me, so I can't. I'm sorry, kids. I got to hit you. I'm sorry, wife. You know, my mom wasn't there. I don't know how to treat a woman. I didn't get the love from a mother, so I'm not going to treat you like a wife. I'm going to treat you like my mom. I have every reason to do those things, but I don't. And that's why when I see people and I see these parents struggling, my soul bursts for them because I want to be like, there's another way. Your child is not a broken toy. You can help them. They can turn into a great person, but we just have to give them the right tools in the right way. And that's constantly what I'm trying to do with this podcast. I'm trying to say the words in the right way to help that parent see that thing. And that's exactly what I saw in what you were just saying to Jared. We can help these kids, man. There's a lot out there who they're getting like tossed to the side as if they're broken toys. I was a broken toy though. And instead of ending up in the land of misfit toys, I found my way back to the mainland. And I found all these other guys. I started working with them. And so when I see this, it's a very, very personal discussion we're having here because I keep seeing myself on both sides of it. I keep seeing myself like, oh, there's that anxious, depressed kid. And then I slide over and I'm like, oh, but there's that parent who overcame and didn't put the identity of the label on anything and said, you can be you. We just got to find a way that works for you in your system. And I that's why I really enjoy having both of you on my shoulder in this discussion, because I can see through both of your eyes and I appreciate both of your eyes. And for any parent watching this, understand your child, whatever it is they're going through, they can overcome that. It's embarrassing to admit how many scars are on this body from this person. It's sad, the places that I have been, but how far your child can go, as long as you don't quit on them, as long as you keep showing up, watching content like this, you can get them from going into that darkness. You can catch them before they go all the way down. And that's why this, as much as I enjoy, the jokes, the banter and all that, it's also very, very real to me. It's very, very important that, especially for the parent watching this, you understand that if you take this and apply it, you can literally change the entire trajectory of your child's life. I had to do it by myself, but I had good men that helped me very later on and really advance. But you can do it now, teens, preteens, very young. And so I hope that's not lost on anybody watching this.
Yeah.
That
Trauma
kind of
can heal.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me, you mentioned earlier about identity. I'm going to bring it over to there, but I'm going to start it with an anecdote about about a friend of mine who he was a product of a abusive childhood. His father was physically and emotionally abusive to him and abusive to his mother, and broke the family up and had all kinds of problems. And he basically left and never wanted to have anything to do with his father again. And a few years after he had left, he was having dinner with some friends. And as part of the conversation, it came up, I was abused as a child. And then the lady of the house was like, well, you poor dear, I feel so bad for your kids. He's like, why would you feel bad for my kids? And she's like, well, because you're abused, it's really, really very likely that you're going to abuse your children too. It's like 90%. And he's like, go to hell, because I will never beat my children, because I know what it was like, and I don't want my kids to go through that. He's like, there is no way that will ever happen. He ignored the statistic. He made a decision early that said, I went through this. I'm not going to put my kids through this. Now, he struggled as a parent, not with abuse, but with just other types of things, not knowing how to be a good parent because he'd never seen that. But it was to me, that was a great signal. He had the identity put on him of, oh, you're the victim of abuse. And then other people made the assumption that means you are now likely to be an abuser. And he turned that on its head. He didn't accept that identity. Now, that goes with kids as well. And this happens quite a bit. And there's been studies done on this, in fact, that when you have a kid that has a identity, the diagnoses of, say, ADHD, then teachers end up treating that child slightly different, because they know that child has ADHD, and so they react differently to them. And depends on where the study was done, and depends on how long ago it was. But there's various
Jared,
things.
I don't mean to interrupt. When you say they treat them differently, is it in a positive way or a negative way?
It's both. The statistics show that the majority, and by majority I mean over 50%, do treat them in a negative way. And then there's another, and that's a few studies, and a few other studies have shown that they treated them differently. Now, most of those studies were done prior to our current more acceptance of these kind of things, and before we have things like IRBs and all kinds of specific requirements from school districts for children that have these identified disabilities. And so yeah, there can be that reaction from people who say, oh, he has ADHD. Now I've lowered my expectations. I don't expect you to do as much. I don't expect you to be able to handle as much. Or, oh, he has autism. Oh, I'm going to lower my expectations of who you are and what you can accomplish in life. Oh, you have depression. So when you're sad, I'm just going to assume you have depression, and we're just not going to pay attention to that anymore. There's those kinds of reactions that can definitely occur based on an identity label. And that's an external thing. That doesn't come from internal. That comes from other people that I don't have any control over how they're going to react. But as parents, we can do our best to mitigate some of those. That, for example, with my son Gavin, he has an IEP, basically an intervention that goes with the school, that he has ADHD. Once a year, we get to sit down with all of his teachers, and we get to talk to them about this. And our message consistently has been, here are the things that he struggles with. We know this. He knows this. We want you to know this, so that when he struggles with this, you don't come down hard on him for not being able to do something like this. But we still want him held to a standard. We still want him to do the work. We're not saying we don't want him to do the work. We just want a little bit of consideration that he may not get it done quite as quickly as some other people. And here are his strengths. Here's what he does great. If you have another kid who's struggling in the class, put Gavin with him. He will look after that kid like a shepherd. He will absolutely help you with the kids that you have the worst time helping, because that's what he's awesome at. So use his strengths and accommodate what he has difficulties with, instead of just coming and saying, yeah, can you please just give him a break? You know, we actually want him. We try vocally. We try with every time we interact with the teachers to not only emphasize what things that he will struggle with, which he does, and again, he knows this too, but also how can you use him better in the class? How can he help you in your class? So we're trying to overcome that idea that there's only the weakness, that there's only what goes wrong. We're also trying to communicate to these teachers and the people that work with him. Kid's pretty awesome. You know, kid's got it going on. He's very sharp in a bunch of ways. Don't just focus on this one thing. And so we provide that information rather than providing them with just the label.
So I have to jump in because you mentioned identity, and a light bulb went off in my head about typical nice guy, right? No more Mr. Nice Guy. So that's exactly where I went with that. And we speaking about ADHD, and we know it affects boys at a very much higher percentage. There's a lot more young boys who are diagnosed with ADHD than girls. And you know, I think if we understand trauma, right, it to a degree it paints a picture of the world that the world is unsafe. As a child, right, you're helpless as a child, so you grow up and you become helpless as an adult. So this kind of shapes your identity, right? It creates who you are based on what you experienced in childhood. And now we look at a lot of young boys, and I'm going to bring up the nice guys, because you said you had a friend who didn't abuse his kid, which is great since he came from an abusive household. But there's two sides to that, right? There's the young boy who grows up to be aggressive and confrontational. And then there's the other guy who becomes dependent or compliant, right? That's the nice guy. And to me, that's the breakdown of the identities we're creating in young men these days. Both of it is very toxic. And I hate to use that word, but it is from a personality perspective, right? It doesn't teach young men how to connect with other people, right? They're always on guard. They feel helpless, so they lash out, right? They show aggression. They can't connect. And the same thing with the nice guy. They feel helpless, so they just cling or attach to whoever they can, right? They become needy. And, you know, I don't need to go into the nice guy stuff, but I think that's what I see happening, right? And that's why, again, with what I talk a lot about childhood trauma, I think we're completely changing the personalities of these kids as they grow up. And it's not just boys. Obviously, girls are involved. You know, we can go into how their personalities have changed, right? We can get into eating disorders. We can get into self-mutilation, all these things that these kids are doing today. And we put them on medication. Nobody's trying to figure out why. Where did it come from? And I don't think that's genetic, right? I don't think these ideas that a child has in their mind, they grow up and they feel helpless, they feel harmed, they have trauma, and they start cutting themselves for attention. To me, that's horrible, right? That's something I would love if we could give some insight to other parents to maybe be preventative or help them in those situations. And I know that was a lot.
That was a lot. Part of the problem with the things that you're talking about come from, like you said, sometimes it's a lack of attention, sometimes it's trauma, And actually, let's be frank about it, lack of attention is trauma for kids. When kids look up to their parents for everything that they have and everything that they are, and their survival is dependent on a parent. And not only that, but they're their primary role model. They're the person that is their primary caregiver, their primary teacher, their primary role model for all of their formative years. And then you as a parent don't provide what the child needs. And those needs will vary slightly by child and their personality type and so on and so forth. But when you don't provide them what they need, that becomes trauma. So how do you overcome that? Well, Zac says it all the time: presence over presence. Give them the time, and if that means sacrificing other areas of your life, what's more important? Is it your job or your schoolwork or your hobby or going and hanging out with your friends, or is it your freaking child? Set your priorities straight, figure it out, and find the time to spend with your child. So you don't have 2 Mercedes out in your driveway. Maybe you drive a couple of Chevys that are kind of broken down and go into the shop every once in a while. Is that more important to have what the Joneses have next door, or to have well-adjusted, happy children who are ready for society and ready to be good members of society and to be productive and to be happy? And that's, the way we adjust priorities in the world is very different. And society gives us one type of view of how we're supposed to be, and it's just not conducive to a good childhood. Latchkey kids and all these other kind of things. And yes, sometimes those types of approaches are necessary in order for you to, because of whatever's gone on. Sometimes it does take all of your time just to get food on the table. If that's the case, I feel for you, and do the best you can. Your kids will also, by the way, understand that, maybe to a lesser extent than other adults, but they're going to understand it, and they're going to see that you're making the effort at the very least. So, in cases like what you're talking about, it is more about the time than anything else. And that can resolve an awful lot of difficulties with some of these developed disorders like self-harm, or to a certain extent anxiety and even depression. And those are great, even for kids that have severe cases of those. That's still important, no matter how you slice it. No matter what you do, no matter who you are, no matter where your kids are, that priority should be there regardless. And yes, if it's there, then you're less likely to see some of those other traumas. Some of those other disorders will not be there as often. So yeah, absolutely.
When I look at it, if there's a whole saying, don't judge.
You got static, brother.
Big time.
Then you jump in.
No, Jared, I think that was well said. I think parents need to hear that. I think that was well thought out. And, to add to it, I think, we do need to teach our kids to experience pleasure with other people, right? To not be closed, to be open, and to be empathetic. You said if you're a parent and you're constantly struggling to survive, right? You're working long hours, or you're under a lot of pressure. What better way to connect to your kid where your kid can empathize with you, because you've been giving them empathy, right? They understand the position you're in is tough, and they don't see it like, oh, dad's not paying attention to me, he's neglecting me. No, they understand. They say dad's doing what he has to do to help the family. So I think to make those distinctions, right? We're not saying be a poor peasant and spend all the time with your kid. Do what you have to do, right? Whether that's financially, if it's a job, if it's a business you have, but you need to prioritize. You need to have a balance. You can't just neglect your kids, because neglect is abuse. And, if you look at statistics, 50% of kids are physically abused, and I think 40% are neglected. So that's 90% of kids are getting some form of abuse in their home, which is mind-boggling. Did you fix your stuff yet?
Did I?
Yeah, man. You're good.
All right. So one of the things I was going to say is we look at kids And one kid's a monkey, and we're like, well, you don't swim good enough, and the other kid's a fish, and we're like, you don't climb good enough. And the problem we're seeing there is that these kids are unique, and these kids, they have certain skill sets, and these kids, you can eliminate a lot of their issues if you say, hey, kid, you're a fish, you can't climb. Oh, and by the way, you're going to be angry too because we're going to keep yelling at you for not being able to climb. That's an issue to me, because then you're putting on a series of issues. And I'm going to try to speak with less force, and maybe that'll be less static. I'm not sure what's going on there. I'll just go back to hosting, but I'm going to get this out. Jared, what you did for your son is what we're trying to get all these parents to do. Like, Gavin, if you were just to say, hey, you don't sit there and take tests perfectly, or sit there and sit still, like, I don't even know whatever the things were. But if you're like, hey, if you let him go help somebody, you'll see his talent. And all of a sudden, the kid who's like, you're not getting it right, and he's getting frustrated, getting angry, now he's like, I'm helping. I'm feeling positive. I'm contributing. I am a valuable member of this little squad of learners here now. And that now the anger is gone because it's been replaced with purpose. And if you take men, a majority of men that I work with and I've had to work with to get from certain spots to certain spots, one of the biggest things missing is service. They don't serve. They have no service in their life. They're like, I'm jacked. I'm trying to lead my family, but I'm still not satisfied. And I'm like, brother, what's your higher calling? What's your mission? Like, what's your bigger? Mine is to help men. It's very clear, to help families. Like, this is what I do. This is my, if you got this trident of mind, body, spirit, well, the staff to me is service. Where am I sending those things? Like, where am I pointing in what direction? And so that goes for kids too. Where can you put them in a position for them to show their strengths, to serve the community, to show their worth, so they don't feel bad about themselves? And with that, I'm throwing that grenade to you guys. I want to jump off and go back to moderating duties.
You actually bring up a really good point, where there has been a lot of studies that have shown that one of the biggest consistent elements to people that have what we would define as happy, well-adjusted lives is they involve themselves in altruistic behaviors. They do serve other people in some way. Now, what that altruistic behavior is doesn't even matter. Is it through a church? Is it volunteering at the local shelter or the food kitchen? Is it mowing your neighbor's yard every once in a while, or going and talking to people at an assisted living home? It doesn't matter what it is that you do, as long as you're doing something that reaches outside yourself toward other people. And that seems to be a consistent driver for happiness for people that are well adjusted. There's other contributing factors to that as well, but that's one of the most consistent ones that we've found. So by showing that example as a parent, that you are willing to reach outside yourself, and if you actually do that work and reach outside yourself to other people, guess what you are more likely to also do? Reach out to your kids. I know that in the military, there's a lot of research on what they try to do is encourage servant leadership. That you are happy that other people can exceed you, that you want the people underneath of you to do better than you, because that means that you're building a stronger organization overall. That's what servant leadership is about. I want the people that I oversee to succeed at the best that they possibly can. And if they surpass me, fantastic. That was me doing my job. That should be the way that you look at your kids as well. Not as they're my kids, but as they are somebody who I need to help become the best that they can be. And if they surpass me, hallelujah, because they are now on a path that I can only have dreamed about. And that's what we want for our kids, to have any other viewpoint of how you're raising your kids other than as a servant to them, as somebody who is going to help them achieve their full potential. Then the other things that Anthony's talking about, those other types of abuses and traumas, will now start to infiltrate that thing, those formative years, because you now don't have somebody guiding you through those areas that you need that best help to find. So servant leadership, being altruistic, be altruistic to your kids. They deserve it more than anybody else. They're the thing that is the most permanent in your life. So why would you waste your altruism on other things before you would waste it on your kids? Well, not waste it, before you would spend it on your kids. So So I'm talking off the top of my head. So
Yeah, that.
It's good to freestyle.
What the heck?
No, so I would say and I agree with you, Jared, and what you said, Zach, 100%. One thing to that, right, that we have to add is if you are not strong enough to help other people, it will take a toll. It will drain your life force. And I think that's where we see now, this day and age, where kids aren't getting that self-confidence, that motivation, right? There's more trauma now than there's ever been before, where it should be the opposite, right? We live in a better time. Things are getting better, advancement in technology. But what I see shaping up is we have this, I don't want to say a threat, but almost a fear that people have about narcissism, right? Narcissists taking over and getting into relationships with people that they are using you as a pawn, right? They're using you to fulfill your need. And if we tell people, be altruistic and help other people and be good, they fall into that trap because they weren't really prepared to be assertive or to stand up for themselves. So, and I'm saying that this is what I see a lot of men do, right? That they're not strong and capable. They want to be good. They really genuinely want to help people because I believe that's human nature, right? I see it in my kids. And I think that they've been so damaged that they go out into the world and instead of finding good people to help, they're getting an attachment to other people who are wounded. And now that person's taking advantage of them and they're trying to help. And they're in these dysfunctional relationships that never seem to work for obvious reasons. So that's where my mind went when you guys were talking to help people.
Do I still have static?
Not as much.
All right. I just realized I had my cell phone right near my mixer. And that's like one of the known things. Sometimes there's static. So I just threw my phone over there.
How long you been doing this?
Look, it's not supposed to happen. But, and hopefully this is coming through clear. I'd hate for the audio to distract from the discussion because we are in the deep end of this. We are now talking about like, hey, this is real lives that we're working with. These are real labels that have been put on kids. And so while we're swimming around here and having this discussion, something too I would like to address or put on the table for you guys to chew on, is where do you go from here? What does the future look like? So it's great. Like, all right, we just got one. We were talking about altruistic activities, finding a way for your child to serve. Now, what about the parents who have to find a way to talk to their family to be like, hey, we're doing things differently now. We're treating, not treating them differently, but the way that you told the teachers with Gavin, like, hey, here's what works best for him. These parents are going to have to tell their family members. They're going to have to tell maybe their community. I've had a kid. I've never had anybody with any learning disabilities like that, but I had a kid with one eye. I had a kid who had extreme performance anxiety. Like him walking on the baseball field is terrifying. And so I had to change my entire coaching tactics to get to his level, to see it through his eyes. Like, all right, how can we get there? And I did. And the kid actually ended up getting a single in championship game. And literally one of the highlights of my life is watching that kid smile when he got that hit. Like, I can't even talk about it right now. It's incredible, man. But how did these parents go about removing the I don't want to say embarrassment, because no parent should be embarrassed, but they're like, hey guys, we do things differently. We do it like this. And I can't find the right term right now, but I think you know what I mean. So I'm throwing that out there.
That's actually an extremely good point because, for example, we have some friends of ours have an autistic child, very high on the spectrum. He, for example, his mom is never going to hear his kid say, "Mom, I love you," because that's not how he can communicate. What he will do is come up to you and he'll utter whole sentences possibly, but he'll utter the same phrase over and over again until you look back at him and repeat the phrase to him. And then he knows that you've listened to him and he's okay, and he'll go off and do another thing. Watching them parent this child for someone who does not understand who Niall is and how he works might think, oh, you're being really harsh with him, because every once in a while they do have to sort of get kind of physical with him, not abusive, but they have to prevent him from hurting himself or others because he doesn't understand that he is this physical presence now. He's 17 years old and he's got some pretty good size on him. And so you have to, the way that they have to parent him, guiding him around by the hand, sort of wrestling him into place occasionally when you want him to not be bothering other people, or there's certain situations like that. And the things that they have to do as parents is very different from what you would have to do with a normal kid. And if you were to see him just walking around the neighborhood, you would think, why are they pulling him along by the hand? Well, maybe he got away from the house and they have to get him back to the house so that he can be safe again. So you see these weird things, and they are totally, they've accepted this. They're like, yeah, people think we're weird. That's fine. We know what we have to do. And the same thing goes with any kind of parenting. You have to find the thing that works for that child. And you have, and that may be something very, very different. Maybe something different than you see with any other parent. So what? Big deal. So you're doing something that's different from other people. Get over yourself and do what's necessary for your children, for their safety, for their sanity, and for the sanity of the family. I have 3 kids. They are so unbelievably different from one another that it's kind of shocking that these 3 completely different personalities could come out of the same family. And the way that we have to treat each one of them is completely different. And we get lots of questions from people. Even my sister, she's texted me a couple times. Why did you let your daughter do this? Because that's how she is. And we've come to terms with that. We have to allow this in order for us to have a good relationship with her. You can judge me all you want for, why did you let your daughter do this? I don't care. And it's from my sister, and that's fine. And she can, I can talk to her about it, whatever. But her responses to my behavior, who gives a crap? Because I'm doing what's important for my daughter. I don't care about her. I mean, yeah, she's my sister, and I care about maintaining that relationship. But I'm more concerned about retaining the relationship with my daughter. So yeah, I'm going to parent her a little different than what you expect me to parent her, because that's what's necessary. It took me a while to figure that out myself. Took me a while to figure out that living up to the expectations or what you think other people expect of you doesn't matter.
That's a great message. I mean, is the static okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So is the phone. All right. So that's an under-discussed aspect of parenting that I think, honestly, Anthony, we should probably put in the docket for a greater discussion, is to be free to be a weird parent. Allow yourself to do things your own way, and your family's way is the best way because it's catered to your family. You do it, like, people look at what you do and they'd be like, no, that's not right. Well, not right according to whom? To not right according to the family that's shattered, not having a good time, because I don't want to do what's normal for them. That's not the type of life I want. My kids are unique. I treat them this way. Jared, same thing with your kids. You got 3 of them. They're all unique. I've got 2. One's a boy, one's a girl. And that's not where the differences end. They're completely unique in their personalities and everything else in between. Anthony, I've met your kids and the same thing. They're out kind of just doing their own thing, which that is the commonality. I mean, it's probably the commonality between all of our kids. They're just doing their thing because we put them in an environment to do that. What works for you, go do that. I fully, whatever that thing is, I support that because you're you. And I think there is still a little bit of a stigma on parents who are not falling in line or not conforming to that, in the same way that when men don't do what they're supposed to do, they're not the nice guy. Oh, you think you're tough because you lift weights? Yeah, that's exactly. It's okay for me to think I'm tough. It's okay for me to want to. It's okay. These are okay things.
So what if you can climb a mountain?
Yeah, Jared is the mountain. And so we see these things, and sometimes it's good. And I think if we could normalize that, the parents who are dealing with the kids who have whatever issue, whatever it is, take that label here, drop it on you. Cool. My kid has this thing. My kid's dealing with this thing, or may show signs of having this thing. We're going to work with them to get them the best possible life they can with that. Period.
Yeah. I want to jump in and give maybe a different view of the same perspective. The same family that has this super autistic kid who also is bipolar and also has some learning disabilities. I mean, it's like this whole trifecta of all kinds of things. My wife was talking to her one day, and she said that, and this mother said that she realized something, that this wasn't her son's trial. This was her trial. Her son's living that life. That's the life that he has. He doesn't know any different. That's his existence. To him, it isn't a trial. To him, it is who he is, and that's it. It is just who he is. The trial, the difficulty, is with her as a parent in learning how to adjust to his needs, learning how to deal with his needs, and how to keep him safe, how to keep him growing and progressing as much as he can within his small sphere. So that's also another way of looking at it from parents with kids that have disabilities or disorders, either one. Don't look at it as that is your child's problem that they have to overcome. They may be able to, they may not be able to. But guess what? That's not you don't have control over that. That's not your decision. You can't help them beat that. I shouldn't say you can't help them. You can't make them beat that. You can't make them get out of that problem. You can't force anything. That's their problem. What your problem is, how do you adjust to help them? That's your problem. Your problem is not their problem. Your problem is how to deal with yourself and your own expectations in helping them. Not your problem isn't dealing with them. Your problem is how do you help them? And that's a much bigger question and a much harder question to answer. Because when you view it as it's their problem and you're going to force them, or you're going to help, you're going to make them get through this, or you're going to drive them through this. With mental disorders, that's not the name of the game. The name of the game is how do you help them? They have to make the choices. They have to be able to do this on their own. All you can do is provide support. So when you understand that it's not their problem, it's your problem and how you deal with it, that's where the game really starts to change.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, Jared. And I would say take even further. That should be every kid.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
If your kid's having a tantrum, if your kid doesn't have disabilities or mental health issues, if they're having a tantrum or a problem, it's our job as parents to help, right? To make sure that we're not going to their level, that we're focusing on what we need to do and not demonizing the child. And we see if your child has a disability, we understand that a little bit more, I would say. And if the kid is so-called normal or doesn't have issues, we tend to discredit that we need to step into that role even more. I would say the question is, how can we help parents, or how could we help parents deal with these issues or these problems? I think a lot of it comes down to is how could we allow our kids to live a life where they feel safe, right? To have lives where they feel safe and they feel comfortable with who they are. I think that's where a lot of this stems from, is right from the onset, we are dumping all of our trauma onto our kids, our anxiety, our stress, our fears, everything that was damaged in our childhood, we're pushing it right onto them. If you want your kids to have the best chance, right? If you want them to grow up into adults and not waste their whole life figuring out what the fuck happened in childhood, start now. Start when they're a kid, right? You have this information. Let them be comfortable. Let them feel safe being in the lives that they have right now.
Well, too, I mean, when you think about that, we're also building the network of parents, right now. So we're looking to build up their network. So they watch this. One of the things they could do that I think would be very beneficial is to normalize the discussion. So don't hide the quirk your kid has. If your kid is, I think you said his name was Neil, and he says the same sentence 6 times, dude, if I went to that family's house and I'd be like, hey, yeah, I like creatine too. And like, oh, cool. And he runs off and does this thing. Like, cool. Like there would be no thing, it would be nothing else of it. But if the parents were like, oh, I'm sorry, don't worry about that, I'd be like, no. We're good. You know, let's remove the concern we have for like these others. Let's get ourselves as parents. We should all understand whether you have something, you don't have something, a genetic issue, a lifestyle issue, whatever it is. Let's work to be our best selves. Let's work to create the environment that's most conducive, not just to dealing with children who are facing medication, facing labels that are slapped on them, but just families, just making families normal to where parents come together and like, yeah, I will let your kid play, my kid play, and we're going to be cool with these kids. And we're going to let them do their thing. We're going to have an environment that's positive and it's beneficial to everyone. And parents talk to each other about parenting.
Yes.
It's not normal yet. But I think the more we do this, the closer we're getting. I talk to the baseball parents about parenting all the time, dude. Like, I dropped in this town and I'm like, we're talking about fatherhood. we're gonna connect. I'm gonna build these boys up, you know, and that's kind of how I'm going about it. And it's great. The parents are on board. They're all, man, it's just like somebody has to start. That's all you have to do. Somebody just be the first one to knock down the domino. And it's like everybody's waiting for it. They know what right looks like. They just need to see somebody do it first.
Yeah. I was going to bring this up as well, kind of along the same lines, is we're talking about parents of kids that have, you know, and how to deal with kids. And again, whether it's trauma or whether it's a disorder or even whether it's just a tantrum that they're throwing right then and you're having difficulty right then, whatever it happens to be, as a parent of that child, you have certain responsibilities. But guess what? As a person that sees that, you have other responsibilities as well. And just like Zach was saying, normalize it. Don't like jump on them and be all weird about it. Like we in church, we had this family that has this child that's super autistic. He goes into classes for other kids, and all the kids are there, and he has behavior that can't be controlled, and it is somewhat disruptive. It's kind of loud. He has trouble sitting down. He speaks just randomly, and will leave a room and come back in and run around the room a little bit. And it's, I mean, for a classroom type situation, that's pretty disruptive. But guess what all those kids did? They didn't care. they saw this boy as different. And so, oh, that's what he does. We're going to continue to pay attention. It wasn't nearly as disruptive as the adults thought it was. The adults are like, oh, we have an expectation of how this classroom should look. And so this is the way he should behave. And when he's not there, we know, what are we going to do? No, the kids couldn't have cared less. They're like, oh, yeah, whatever. You know, and the
kids aren't as traumatized as the adults. That's why.
No, the adults are way more traumatized than the kids. And it's a similar thing. We had, we're in our main meeting at church, and there's this kid who also was autistic. It was a little girl, and she every Sunday she would run up from the back of the church all the way up to the front, get up on the stage, and run around behind the people that are preaching up on the stage, and it was kind of funny. And you'd get parents that would have to like tag team to try to corral her and get her off the stage, all that stuff. And while all this was going on, our pastor, for lack of a better term, was up on the microphone. He says, "You know what? Isn't it wonderful that we have families in our church and that we love our kids? I think that's just fantastic." You know, he just normalized it for everyone in the congregation. It looked like it was kind of disruptive, and he just smiled. He's like, "Wasn't that fun to watch? She's really fast," you know? And so when you're with parents that are having troubles, be willing to just be. Don't hold the same expectations. Oh my gosh, why can't you control your child? What is wrong with you? You know, that's not the right idea either. It's, oh, are you having difficulties? Is there something I can do to help? Or even just pretending like, sometimes you have to just pretend like it doesn't exist either. Like you're like, oh, it's fine. So your child's being disruptive. Let him work it out. It'll be fine. No big deal.
Jared, Anthony came to the house, and my daughter had on a hoodie that had cat ears, and she was jumping around the floor like a freaking cat. And Anthony's like, "Oh yeah, what's up?" And just talking to her. I'm like, this is who she is, man. Like, this is how it is. And someday you'll meet the family. You know, it's one of those things where when you normalize this and the guys come up, you get to just be yourself, and there's no feeling like you have to put on a show. And I think that would take a lot of pressure off parents. But when you're telling that story, I immediately thought of that moment. Like, we were at the dinner table, and my daughter's going under the counter with her cat ears. I'm like, what the hell is happening? And Anthony's just sitting there talking to her, and I'm like, I mean, this is who we are, man. Like, welcome to the family.
Yeah. And kids that have disorders or kids that are suffering from some kind of trauma, the parents may not know how to deal with it, but maybe you do. And it's not your job necessarily to go and talk to the parents and be like, well, let me tell you how to deal with this, but rather just show a good example. When the kid is around you, hey, treat them the way they want to be treated. And if the parents ask you, sure, go ahead and help them out. But be the person that understands that it's not a big deal. That it is the kid is the kid. They're their own individual. Let them be their own individual, and you react to them and meet them where they are. That's far more important than casting judgments here. Well, why can't you control your child? No, guess what? That's not the name of the game. You're not trying to control your child. If you're trying to control your child, you've already lost. So allow that to be a thing and be able to move with it and show a good example to parents that may be struggling. And if you're friends with them, help them out. But yeah, normalize normalcy. There's no such thing as what you should expect from your kid. Your kid is going to be your kid. You can't make them be something else. And regardless of what if they have disabilities or not, you should always be able to meet those children where they are instead of trying to force expectations of how they ought to be. That's just dumb.
Yeah, and I think throwing ropes is good, or lending a helping hand, right?
Yeah, it is.
Showing that you care. I think that is definitely a move in the right direction. I would say that the best influence that you're going to have on other parents is letting them see you with your kids and how you handle stress or hard times, right? Be the example. I think that's the best thing we can do, especially as a dad, right? Shine your light, like Zac was saying. People coming up to you and saying, hey, man, how do you handle this? How would you handle that? That doesn't just happen. That happens because they see you living your best life. They see how you interact with your kids. They see that your kid might be stomping his feet and, okay, it doesn't break you down, right? You're not screaming and yelling and slamming car doors. You're like, hey, you need help? What's going on? When people see that, they understand that you are a beacon of light, right? They can almost empathize with you, and you can empathize with them. And I think that's what we're missing a lot of in society, that connection, that empathy, being able to see each other as a human being. And there's a lot of divide and conquer mentality going on, right? We have to be at war with each other. Who froze, me or Jared?
No, that last part's very well said. There are a lot of, it seems like there is a huge divide. I don't know if this is a COVID thing. We're somewhat new to this town still, so I'm kind of just observing people. I don't know if this is the way it always was or how it's new, but I can say before we left Rhode Island, people really pulled back. They were all in their thing, and like it wasn't normal for me to go to a dad and talk fatherhood. That it wasn't normal for it. No dad ever approached me and was like, hey man, how do you do this with your son? Even though they'll see me and him having a great time, we're high-fiving, having a blast. Not one of them is like, hey man, what do you like? How did you get to that? I would have loved to have that conversation. That should be normal. Like, hey, my son's 3, your son's 12. I want to have an awesome relationship when he's 12. How do I start at 3? I'd be like, dude, let's go. Where do you want to start, man? I've got a lot to say. The same thing.
How much time do you have?
Yeah, sit down. Here, watch all these videos on this podcast, then go to this podcast, watch all those videos. But I see these guys, and slowly they're coming out, man. Like there are 2 men I'm thinking of individually right now who are both directly approached me like, what's up, dude? Like, what are you doing here? And I explained it to them and I broke it down and they started applying it, and we talk all the time now. Oh yeah, I went and did this, or now they're lifting weights with me, or now they're reading books over here with me. And like, I'm so pumped. Like I can't even describe like how good that makes me feel. And I have nothing to do with it outside of having just been there and been the one to speak about it. But to watch that family improve, I see them improving. I see them on the side of the games having more laughs. I see them having a good time. I'm like, I know that the light inside that home is brighter and brighter and brighter through the conversations, the actions of those individual parents. And that's what I love to do here. That's what I love to see with you gentlemen. It motivates me. And so when we see this, when you start to see, let's say 3 dads getting together with their kids in the outfield, and the other dads are going to be like, well, is that an invite thing? Like, why am I not out there? What's up? Come on, man. You don't want to be the dad who's on the sideline. Eventually, your wife's going to be like, hey, little Timmy's going to play with Zac. Why the hell don't you get your ass out there, Mike? Go play with your son, because that dude over there is. And all of a sudden, it's not that you're shaming them to success, but you're just setting the example and you're showing them, hey, dad, it's okay to walk in the field and get involved. It's okay to step up. It's okay to not just be on the sideline passive or just yelling at them to fix themselves, but actually be a part of the process of improvement. And that goes beyond just sports. I fall back to that because that's kind of my avenue, but there's so many ways you can do that. There's Boy Scouts, there's volunteer work, there's a lot of missionary work, there's a lot of religious work. There are groups everywhere. There are organizations literally designed to do this. Google's a thing. Use it. You'll find a way to connect your family to some local event that's going on. And whether you're picking up trash or something, you'll be with your kid, you'll be involved in the community, you'll be out there doing things together. And a lot of what we're talking about here is getting out of our heads and the thoughts and the pressures we have on ourselves. And like, hey, my kid's going through something, or my kid has this issue they're working with. Let's integrate ourselves into the community. Let's go act and continue to live our lives while dealing with this thing. I don't think we should pull back. I think we should expand. I don't think we should let fear and, scarcity get him like, oh, what if we're judged? What if I do the wrong thing? What if they think this? What if my child has an episode? You can't live in fear of something being shown out there. This is my kid. Yeah, he freaked out. It's cool. We'll sit there. Here's how I calm him down. Here's what to do. Hey, neighbors, friends, family, whatever. This happens. This is just a part of our journey. It's okay. And then they learn like, all right, cool. If he has an episode, this is what we do. We go talk softly with them, or we bring him a blanket or whatever his thing is. We offer that.
Yeah.
And
I don't know, man. Sounds like your kids run the house and you're making them weak.
I'd flip you off, Anthony, but that's inappropriate for this channel.
Harsh words. All right. This has been a solid series, gentlemen. We've sat in the shallow end, talked some smack. We've gone to the deep end. It got heavy for a moment there. I had to come out. I had to watch you guys because your opinions on this are very different. Yet your goal with this is the exact same. You want families to win. You want them to improve. And you want them to just have a peaceful journey throughout life. And now medication, not medication. Labels, whether they're legit or not. These are things that families are going to have to figure out within that home. But the more they look at it, the more angles they look at it from, the more videos they watch, the more they prepare themselves. I mean, we literally say at the end of every video, reach out if you have a question. If you're sitting there like, I don't have anyone to talk to, we can be your 3 best friends that don't know you. Reach out. I will tell you everything about my family. Anthony will tell you. Jared will tell you everything we've been through, what we've learned, what's worked, what hasn't. All you have to do is be the one to reach in the middle, though, because we don't know you. We don't know what you're suffering with. You've got to come to us and say, hey, question, what about this situation? And it's not going to cost you anything. It's a DM. If you want to go deeper, you can really invest in getting some deep one-on-one work. And then that's a whole nother level to this game. Or if you're a man looking at your life together, we're inside the same group, the Fraternity of Excellence. The resources are there. Some require money, some require time, some require nothing more but you putting your hand out saying, hey, I have this question for you. And we'd be like, hey, here's your answer. Go try that. Let me know what happens. It's that easy. But you've got to be the one to lean forward. And I promise you, your kids are worth getting over that resistance by the ego that you're supposed to have all the answers, because you're not. None of us do. I talk to these guys all the time. I have literally spoken to both of these men and bore my soul about, I have no idea what I'm doing. Please help me. Like literally, there have been conversations like that. And it's not like, oh, they're going to think I'm stupid. It's like, no, they're going to help me learn. You might think it, but at least you'll still help me. You'll make me smarter in the process. And so, gents, I appreciate your time. Closing words on the entire series. Jared first. You're muted, brother.
That was well said, Jared.
Sure.
I'll
That
go.
was well said. Yeah, no.
And
Gonna go the same route that I did previously, but I mean, what we're talking about more than anything here is you have to start to help your kids. Now, what pathway that takes is going to be very individual. Each child is going to require individual attention. You have to figure it out for each child on their own, not cookie cutter for anything that doesn't exist. But if you are experiencing any kind of problems with your child, or if your child seems to be struggling in certain areas, don't just try to ignore it. Don't try to sweep it under the rug and say, oh, they're going to figure it out. Start as a parent by serving them. Start as a parent by helping them in whatever you can figure out at the time. And then go find some freaking help. You won't have all the answers. Your experience won't cover the gamut. You just can't. You and your spouse or whoever else is with you, No, there has to be, you can involve hundreds of people and maybe not find the right answers. Now, I'm not saying that it's hopeless, but for heaven's sake, just look somewhere and find help from someone. Start looking. And once you start, you'll be amazed the type of people that are going to come out of the woodwork and the type of resources you'll find, which will help you. And if you just sit back and try to ignore it or pretend it doesn't exist, that's not going to function. That's not going to do it. No matter if I could get any message out at all from any of this, it is start helping. Don't ignore it, and seek help. Those are the two things. Start and seek help. Anything else is going to be more up to what the situation is and who the individual is. But those two things, if you can do that, you're well on your way to finding a solution.
It's well said. Anthony.
Yeah, I just have one thing. Stop hitting your kids. No, I think
He's not wrong.
Yeah, I was ready to move on. That was a succinct point.
No, I want to emphasize the importance of messaging us, leaving a comment, having a question, right? Really being engaged on what it is that we're doing here, and to create a peaceful home. If your house is chaotic, if it's literally hell, and there's fights, there's conflicts, there's a lot of negative energy, reach out, right? You don't have to live like this every day. This is real. We've changed our homes, all three of us. We've created a better environment. And through that creation, we haven't given in. We're not weak. We're not victims. Believe it or not, we've actually become stronger. We're better meant for it. And to me, that's the goal. Your home is a reflection of who you are, especially if you're the dad, you're leading your home. If it's a mess, stop being a victim, take action, and find ways to get help.
That's a solid closing point, man. If you've tuned in, I pretty much said what I had to say. I dropped that. I'm not gonna go in and
roll for another hour.
Gear. Sometime we'll get it going for another 45 minutes. No, but honestly, we got to wrap it up at some point. And I think this is a great spot. This was a great series, man. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed your perspectives. I enjoyed your discussions. I enjoyed your civil discourse. Because that's missing in society. You guys argued ideas. You didn't argue personalities. You didn't argue against each other. You argued your ideas with facts, logic, reason, and emotional control. And it doesn't surprise me at all that your families are filled with peace, because that's how you speak with your kids. When the arguments pop up, you don't argue with the kid. You're bad, or you. It's, hey, your idea, my idea. Let's match them up. Let's put our ideas in the ring and see which one comes out of there. And it's one of those things where the kids have an equal fight in that one. They don't have a chance in the physical world. They're children, and they shouldn't even have to. But if their ideas are strong and you build them up, they'll be able to bring that to you. And that, for my closing point, will be when we look at anything that's slapped onto our kids, that is something that we look at ourselves. We look at how we're going about it. Is there anything I can do to better support you? It's not, let me give you this pill to fix the problem. It's not, well, you have this thing, so you can't go and do these things. That's not how it is. You can go and do what you want to do. This is something that it's just a new reality. This is just a different world that you're living in. Like you were talking about that kid, Neil, that his world is normal. Your child they're in their world. They're allow them to thrive there. Put them in a position where they can serve and show their skill sets. Your kid could be an amazing swimmer, but you keep thinking that he's supposed to be like all these other monkey kids and climbing trees and doing those things and running around. Your kid's a fish. A lot of kids, they're fish, and if you're going to swim or you're a bird, kids have different skills. You have 3 different kids with 3 different personalities. One of them could fly, one could swim, one could climb. But if you switch them up and tell them that they're bad because they can't do what the other one can do, you've now lost the entire point of your child. They're supposed to be their own person. They're not supposed to be like the Joneses. They're not supposed to be like their sibling. They're not supposed to be like you or who you weren't. They're supposed to be them. And so ensure you're doing your best to support them where they're at and not where you think they're supposed to be. And then you can get them to where they need to go, which they will define and they will set. And you've got their back the whole way through. And it's one of those things, man. We would lay on glass for our kids to walk across to get to the other side. But eventually, we raise our kids to the point where their feet are calloused and they can just walk across to themselves. And they find their own way. And so in the beginning, you might have that pain, those frustrations, that struggle to initially figure out the new routine, the new system, the new cues that you can use. But once you do and you strengthen it, You teach the child to do it themselves. And that's where you'll see them grow. And so you could have a case where your whole life is anchored down, you can't do anything, or you could go an alternate timeline. And this is going to go back to my Dune. You can make another choice with a different result. And then you're going to have a kid who's thriving, and your life is going to be much less stressful, and you're not going to feel like you were held back or missed out on anything. And so that's my hope with this 3-part series. We spent a lot of time on here. This is 3.5 hours plus of just talking about this. We didn't do this because we don't have anything else going on in our lives. We actually have quite a bit. We're very busy, man. Jared's like way behind in schoolwork because he did this with us. And so you need to get back there and writing, brother.
True story.
So thank you for tuning in. If you like the content and you have any questions, please reach out. There is no question that's stupid. Nothing we're going to push to the side. If you have it, ask it and we'll address it in the comments below or a personal DM. I have links to all of our social media in the description below. Make sure you've liked and subscribed. And if you know a parent who's struggling, either they have been struggling for years trying to figure out what the system looks like, or they're freshly facing a diagnosis or freshly facing an obstacle thrown in their path and they don't know what to do, we're here for the discussion. You're not alone. They're not alone. This is what we do. This is why we are here. This is, for me, this is the service. This is that rod. This is where I'm going with it. I know 100% this is where Anthony's going with it. And Jared literally has dedicated his life to getting his doctorate in this and understanding these things. You don't accidentally write a dissertation. You don't accidentally get your doctorate degree. Like, that's not a mistake. That's very intentional. That's stressful. That's time consuming, energy consuming, money consuming. Like, it takes a lot. And so I can speak on behalf of these two gentlemen and say they're all in as well. So now the ball is in your court. If you need us, reach out. We'll be here. This has been another episode and the conclusion of our 3-part series.